September the 10th Economist had a headline article, "The Art of the Lie," subtitled "Post-Truth Politics in the Age of Social Media." And in that article, they drew attention critically to the spread of what they call post-truth politics. In other words, a world where it doesn't matter so much what is true, as long as you just say what feels right, what is the most effective thing, what gets the crowd going. And this they associate with magical thinking and a general idea that truth is no longer, it's of secondary importance, not primary importance. Now this was interesting to me because in the book that I'm currently getting published, called My Years of Magical Thinking, I argue that we're going through a similar phase to what happened 2,000 years ago, when after 5 centuries of the sort of rationalist humanism we associate with the classical era, which was very much about the quest for what is true, the good and the true were equated. It was followed by the rise of magical thinking in the Roman era, and I think that something very similar is happening now. And this magical thinking I also associated with a shift from considering truth to be the most important thing to what is actually feels right, what is useful, what works as the most important thing. And I could say that in the sort of religious thinking period, the emphasis was on righteousness. And that actually was more important than truthfulness. So, for example, if a priest was going through a spiritual crisis, dark night of the soul, and was doubting the existence of God, it was still correct to preach the righteous gospel. And so the idea, the scientific idea that truth actually becomes more important is quite threatening to that religious idea. You get these moral dilemmas. Surely this is a type of research which we shouldn't do because it could have bad ethical implications. And the scientist's retort is, well, we should know the truth. Now, I was brought up in that sort of spirit in the 1950s, to the extent that, I almost equate truth with righteousness. And I was never very good at mastering the sort of social niceties of, when someone is sort of on their deathbed coming in and saying, "Oh, you're looking so well," and someone has had a new haircut, saying, "Oh, how lovely, that really suits you," when actually you think it's bloody awful. I was never very good at that, knowing that when actually you should say what feels right. This isn't the same as the religious thing, which is, it's not that it's righteous to tell people that their new hat looks absolutely wonderful, because you might even say that's encouraging vanity like that. It's a question of, in the immediate personal sphere you're in, the subjective world you're in, it feels right to say that. It has a right effect. And that, in those circumstances, can be more important than truth. Now this shift, why did this shift take place? I associated it in the book with this shift from Platonism towards Aristotelianism, in the sense that the Platonic idea is that the subjective world we're living in is this world of shadows. We're like people in a cave looking at the shadows on the back wall of the cave, and we're taking this for our reality. Whereas if we were to turn round and see the entrance of the cave, the light streaming in, and the real objects that were casting those shadows, then we would know the truth. And that this is an important thing to do. It is better, the truth is better, because it is objective, it is eternal compared with these subjective shadows that are fooling us. Now, that was a very powerful idea, and it held sway for centuries. But Aristotle, his pupil, saw something rather different. He said, look, if we've been given these senses, internal and external senses, and we're in this subjective world, surely human knowledge ought to begin with observing that world. It's a bit as if we were fish in a pond. Now, it's all very well speculating about actually there's a world of air up above us, you know, and it's much bigger than this little pond. But we're fish, you know, we're designed to be in water, so surely we should begin by mastering the medium we're in, get to know the actual world we live in, rather than speculating about what lies out there, which is very interesting and it may actually be very important. But let's deal with what we've been designed to work with. And so the emphasis then was, let's look at those shadows, let's get to know them, let's learn how to work with the illusion we're born into. So, for example, imagine someone who falls madly in love with the neighbour's wife. They're going through an amazing experience. Not everyone lives and has that experience. You know, the torments, the ups and downs, the dizziness, everything of being madly in love. Now, to have someone telling him the truth, that actually this is Satan tempting him from the path of righteousness, or that actually it's his genes wanting to propagate themselves because of, from an evolutionist, or that it's his hormones that are causing this to happen, or whatever true explanation lies behind this. The question is that true explanation really of more value than the experience that he's having? The experience of falling in love, which, if you move into the artistic culture, might be a reason to make a wonderful poem, to paint a picture, to compose music, or in the magical world, it could be, if you're a New Ager, it could be a reason to discover your inner feminine, or if you're a more traditional magician or a pagan, it could be an avenue to form a relationship with a goddess. All things you could do with that wonderful subjective experience. Or do you just say, oh, it's my hormones and I can take a tablet and cure myself of this? Now, extending that, I use the metaphor of a very great movie. You can enjoy the experience of a great movie, and it could be life-changing. It could be incredible. You could write a thesis on the themes of this movie, or else a skeptic could say, "But it's just actors. You know, it's all done with special effects. Nothing real there." Or a scientist could actually take the CD disc, look at it through a microscope, and say, "Look, it's just a long string of digital information. That's really what you've experienced." And the argument I was saying is that truth really of greater value than the extraordinary utility of exploring the themes in that movie, the subjective experience you get from watching that movie? So, going back to the magical example, you know, if a very good tarot reading or astrology reading or any type of reading can be a life-changing experience if you know how to use it and how to really work with it. And I think it's arguable that that is of greater value than knowing that maybe it is just your mind seeing patterns where they aren't there, or a cold reading exercise. That's quite interesting. I'm not saying it isn't interesting, that truth, but is it really of greater value? So this is how I saw this shift from truth being the main arbiter to what feels right, what is effective, what is useful in your immediate world. But it's clear from the Economist article But this is very disturbing to some people. And when the examples they give of, like Brexit and Donald Trump and Putin and people playing with truth are certainly very off-putting. Now the question is this what I'm defending? Is this what I'm advocating, that this is the way to go, these lying politicians and people being whipped up into a frenzy? And of course it is not what I'm actually defending. I too find this quite disturbing. And I'll draw a parallel with something else I've said in these videos, and that was when Richard Dawkins interviewing Darren Brown on a cold reading thing for his series on enemies of truth. And he points out with a lot of emphasis that some people extract money from gullible people by pretending that they can speak to their grandparents or dead people, or that they have psychic knowledge or clairvoyance and things like that. And so he's campaigning vigorously against this. And what I said was that actually, if he was campaigning against confidence tricksters, I'm right behind him. You see, I have in my email every day, I get enormous amount of junk spam mail trying to lure me into spending my money. Now, with my search profile, you might expect me to be receiving mail which is trying to fool me with clairvoyant readings like that. I get very little of that. It's mostly bogus scientific claims. People trying to sell me algorithms that will make me a fortune on spread betting, or miracle remedies which have been tested to be more effective than this, that and the other. All these sort of quotes from scientific journals about the effectiveness of this and everything. And I could also say science has been used a lot, the discoveries of science, to kill people and to destroy the environment. But does that mean that I would want a campaign like Richard Dawkins, to call scientists the enemies of the people and things like that, and have science banned? And the answer is absolutely not. My response to this sort of abuse is that surely we need better understanding of science, better scientific education. And that really is what I'm saying in the case of this shift towards magical thinking. The problem to me is not the shift to magical thinking, because it's happened before and it seems to be happening in a very universal way. It's that people are denying it. They're not realizing what it is and not learning how to do magic in order to handle it. So, for example, you see, I wasn't there for the Brexit thing, but let's imagine that someone arguing for Brexit, you can do two things. You can come up with a rational argument, and there are a lot of rational arguments against Brexit, like the importance of keeping the Europe as a big, powerful trading bloc, to stand up to the other things of the world, various advantages, a lot of economic arguments. And whether they were justified or not, they were sort of rational arguments. Now you can counter that with a slogan, and it might be something like England for the English. Now, is that an argument? And I say it isn't, because an argument, you can't keep repeating an argument, it begins to lose its power. A complex argument may need to be said several times before people fully understand it. But if you keep on repeating it after that, people's minds shut down. They don't want to hear the same thing over and over and over again once they've got it. Whereas a slogan is actually an incantation. The more you repeat it, the more it gains momentum. So, for instance, if someone was on a stage putting forward an argument for Brexit, and the audience start to shout, England for the English, England for the English, England for the English, it'll come to dominate that argument. Now, I think the question is, did the people doing that, were they clever magicians, black magicians, deliberately using occult powers to win the election? I think not. I think this is a question of this sorcerer's apprentice. You see, they didn't realize that when you chant an incantation, you're invoking a spirit. They thought they were just applying a formula. They probably sort of looked at the demographics of the English population, you know, what percentage of people were a bit nationalistic, and said, I think if we say England for the English, we'll probably get another so many percentage of votes with that slogan. And they think it's a sort of formula they can use and then put it aside. And I think that actually they were invoking a spirit. What was the spirit they're invoking? Well, it's a very lovely spirit. It's about cottage gardens with rambling roses. It's about cricket on the village green and a pint of beer in your hand, which is cool but not so cold that it makes you belch. It's about a sense of fair play. It's a lovely thing. This is the spirit you're invoking. But you see, a spirit in magical thinking is not a mechanical thing that you can switch on and switch off. It's an entity. It's alive in a sense. So think of that beautiful spirit as more like a beautiful cat. It's a lovely thing. But if you mistreat it or reject it, it can scratch you. It can turn into a hellcat. And so, for instance, that spirit of Englishness, which includes being unusually open to differences, allowing eccentricities, welcoming people who are a bit different. When it's feeling insecure and frightened, English people become terribly insular. They shut out the other people. They hate the other people. The sort of sense of fair play. I mean, another English thing is that sense of self-deprecating modesty. You know, oh no, I'm not really good at playing the piano. I've just been studying it for 20 years. But the inverse of that is a sort of arrogance that makes the English people think that they had the right to colonize the rest of the world. You know, what's a lovely spirit? Get it in a bad mood and it's bloody awful. And I think this is the sort of thing that's gone wrong with, I mean, the Brexit people. They thought they could just, you know, use slogans. They probably didn't think that they were actually invoking a spirit. They thought they were just using a simple formula that would win people over. But I say, if they really understood better what they were doing, they wouldn't have caused so much harm. It's the story of the sorcerer's apprentice, you know, who learnt a bit of magic, and then he called up the spirits that flooded the whole laboratory, you know. So really, what I'm arguing in my book is that I think it seems to me a fairly natural process to move forward from scientific thinking towards magical thinking as a way to handle a very complex world. Just as the shift we saw 2,000 years ago, when we went from Platonic ideas of the vital nature of truth to the Aristotelian thing is, no, we should simply observe the world we're in. And he was a very good observer. That seems a natural progression. And I noticed that, you know, symbolically it's marked in the Bible by Pontius Pilate when he was judging Jesus. He said, "What is truth?" Now, of course, it's only a word of the Bible and maybe mistranslated or something, but it's interesting that it's presented not a judge saying, "What is the truth?" which is what you expect, but "What is truth?" And going back to that Derren Brown-Dawkins interview, one of the things, it was clear that they felt that the academics that were calling up the postmodern academics were questioning whether there is a truth. They found this very threatening, and I think there's a strong feeling there that, you see, the idea of a post-truth world, they associate with a world where there is no truth. Now, that is not magical thinking. Magical thinking doesn't, just with Aristotelian thinking, it doesn't say there is no truth, that Plato got it wrong. It simply says that we shouldn't be worrying too much about that when we ought to be exploring the pond we're in rather than worrying about whether the air up there. That is surely the first priority. It's just a question of emphasis. It's not to say that it's... the important thing is not the fact that your friend looks an absolute idiot in his new suit, but rather, if he's going for a job interview tomorrow, it's more appropriate. It would have a better effect if you say, "Oh, you look brilliant, you know, you're going to win them over." Now, of course, this is a question of degree. It's a question of feeling, because if he really does look ludicrous in that suit and is going to fail his interview, then you might do better to tell him the truth. But just in between, you know. We're not arguing that there is no truth, because that becomes a new truth in itself. It's paradoxical. We're simply saying we're moving to a world where the fact that a reading is life-changing and reassuring, and or doing a ritual could do you good, that is more important than arguing about whether it actually caused a change or whether there really were spirits present when you did that. That is interesting, but it is of secondary importance to the fact that magic works.